Dear all, thank you very much for joining us here at our DFDS webinar, How to Navigate the Brexit Scenarios. My name is Michael Mortensen, working as a Brexit consultant for DFDS. I'll be the moderator of this session, which we have planned to last approximately 60 minutes. This webinar is a result of DFDS wanting to add information directly to customers and other stakeholders. The agenda of today is threefold. First of all, setting the scene on what outcome there still seems possible despite only 78 days until current Brexit days. This is covered by Elsa. Give an update on the current demands and how to prepare, which Emma will take us through. And last but not least, a Q&A session. And if you're watching the live session, then you can forward your questions on the broadcast widget. All specialists will be available to answer your questions. Knows to answer the questions, but in case we can't make it on time, we will make sure to get back to everybody afterwards. DFDS is a 150-year young Danish transport company that provides integrated shipping and logistics solutions across Europe and in the Mediterranean. This is purely to highlight how important DFDS, how important UK is for DFDS and our many customers, and all the different solutions we are offering in and out of the UK. This is our CEO, Niels Smedegaard for DFDS. He has an overall message that preparation is vital. And this is why DFDS the last many months has worked on various areas to prepare ourselves, our customers and authorities for a potential hard Brexit, March 29, 2019. Besides engaging with our customers, authorities, trade associations, we are prepared internally. The aim is to continue living up to our role of ensuring as smooth transportation services as possible to support growth for our customers, even after a potential Brexit. Are you there, Elsa?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Thanks for taking the time to help us navigate this complex topic.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Good. We are happy that you are here. So with no further ado, I hand over to you, Elsa. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. So today I will try to give you a sense on how to navigate the different Brexit scenarios. And rather than focusing on how to get there, the purpose of this talk is really to clarify what the different scenarios are and what they imply for the economic relationship between the EU and the UK. So before getting into the details of each scenarios and sort of give you key insights, let me first remind you what the current timeline is on the road to Brexit. So I guess you must all know by now that in June 23rd, 2016, the UK, by referendum, voted to leave the EU. Since then, the UK government had to start putting in place the structures and agreements for the UK to actually exit the European Union. So in that respect, in March 29, 2017, the UK triggered the Article 50. And this is a really important milestone on the road to Brexit. So for two reasons. First, because it sets the date for the actual exit of the UK 2 years after this point. So meaning in March 29, 2019, which by now is really close. And second of all, on this day, it also set the opening of the negotiations for the actual term of the exit of the UK. So at the beginning of the negotiation and during the process, the Prime Minister tried to stress what were the objectives of the UK for these negotiations. So I will just stress some, I think, important objectives. So first, the UK stressed that they wanted to take back control, so take back control not only of its sovereignty, but also of its border, of its rules, and they were trying to sort of get back this power of setting their own rules and not having to rely on the approval of Brussels for everything that had to do with external trade, for instance, migration, or standards and regulations. They also wanted to avoid any significant increase in trade barrier with the EU, and so the Prime Minister repeatedly said that they wanted to come up with the freest deal as possible, provided that the EU would agree, obviously. And finally, they wanted to be able to have an independent trade policy with any third party and to sort of have their own agreements with all non-EU countries. While the negotiations were taking place, it became clear that there was another central point to be focusing on, which was the Northern Ireland border. So especially in December 2017, it became clear that it was a priority to try to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland, especially to get the DUP approval, which Theresa May crucially needed. So after these long and intense negotiations with the EU, both parties, the UK and the EU, finally settled on a withdrawal agreement on November 14 of 2018. So what is this agreement? Well, nearly 600-page long legal document that details the nature of the future of the relationship between the EU and the UK. I'll be a bit more specific later on about that, but an important thing to notice is that, well, they agreed on a deal, but before moving forward and taking the next level for the terms of the Brexit, well, this agreement has to be discussed and put to a vote in the House of Commons. And if the House of Commons doesn't back the agreement, well, then things might evolve in different direction. So this vote has been set to take place in January 15 of 2019, which is next week. But it's important to remember that this vote was initially meant to take place in December, but was postponed by Theresa May because of the clear lack of support for it at the time. So from December to now, Theresa May tried to sort of get some clarifications and written text from Brussels on tricky issues. And so one of these tricky issues is the backstop. I'll be clearer on what the backstop is and what were the potential issues regarding that point later on. So no need to say that the outcome of the vote will be crucial for the nature of Brexit and the future of UK and EU relationship. So as Theresa May repeatedly stated, the choice now seems to be between this deal, a no deal, or a no Brexit. So rather than focusing on how to get to these different scenarios and the politics around it, I will really try to discuss what each these three scenarios imply. So I will first look at the deal, then the no deal, and then finally the no Brexit option. And I will conclude looking at any other alternatives that were not suggested by Theresa May. So the deal. What kind of Brexit this is? What do we learn from these 600 pages? So first of all, it means that the UK will be outside the single markets. except for Northern Ireland, which will have a sort of specific status, which will give the UK the opportunity to diverge from EU regulations. It will also mean that it's the end of the free movement of people, which will allow the UK to set their own migration policy. And I think this is a very important element because migration had been put forward during the campaign as a major problem or major reason for people to vote for Brexit. But the most tricky bit in that deal is the fact that it stipulates that there will be a period, which is called the transition period, in which the EU and the UK would have to negotiate a free trade agreement. So the transition period is set to start in March 2019 and ends in December 2020. But, so if by that time, so by the end of the transition period, the UK and the EU do not have an agreement in place, the backstop will apply. So I'll get into details of what the backstop is and what does it imply. But what I think is important to say here that it seems really likely, given the length of normal trade negotiations, that in less than 2 years, the UK and the EU wouldn't really come up with a free trade agreement. So meaning that, well, the backstop is likely to apply. So in that backstop, the UK and EU would be in the so-called temporary customs union, meaning that there's no tariff on goods, no customs checks on goods, no rules of origin requirements for trade in goods. And on top of this, it will restrict the ability of the UK to have its own independent trade policy on goods with any third party. So, meaning that the trade policy of the UK would be decided in Brussels, where the UK would not have a single say in the tariff negotiated there. Finally, they wouldn't be able to diverge from any standards and regulations set in Brussels for trade in goods. And finally, Northern Ireland would potentially be more integrated in the EU to try to avoid a hard border. And it seems that it's likely that they would be part of the single market. So that's a deal. But well, if no solution gets a consensus, meaning that the deal is not approved by the House of Commons, well, it may as well be that there is a no deal. Well, it seems that, at least in the Commons right now, there is some kind of majority against that scenario. But again, I mean, for the no deal not to apply, there has to be some kind of consensus on the way forward. So the first important implication of a no deal is the absence of a transition period. So this means that in March 29, 2019, well, if the UK and the EU fail to sign a withdrawal agreement, the UK will be outside the EU from one day to the next. And this could potentially lead to short-term disruption. However, it's important to say that there's sort of a range of no deals outcomes, which would depend on what the government does between now and March. Specifically, well, the government could put in place potential emergency deals to sort of deal with these short-term disruption. But if none of these emergency deals are put in place, and then if we just go from one day to the next having EU regulation applying and law and standards in the UK, well, and then not having them, well, we could just have what people have referred to a chaotic or cliff edge Brexit. So what kind of disruptions I have in mind when I say when I think about a cliff edge Brexit? Well, first of all, cargo inspection might be required because of the new terms of trade between the UK and the EU. And given that, well, the current infrastructure, it's very likely that there would potentially be some delay because of the lack of experience and infrastructure in the border. There will also be partial breakdown on the regulatory arrangement that make trade possible, and sort of this would be a problem. And finally, some British products might not be certified safe to enter the EU anymore, meaning that waiting for any decision or certification, some product may just be stuck in or not allowed to enter the EU. So let alone these disruption, I mean, there are some guidelines on which terms the UK would trade with the EU. So the UK would be treated as any other member of the WTO by the EU, which means that they would have, in principle, most favored nation tariff rates to trade with the EU, but also with all their partners. So there will be customs checks for trade between the UK and the EU, which were not taking place before. Product certification would be required to access all foreign markets, so the EU included. But there will be potential for regulatory divergence with the EU, which was something that sort of follows this taking back control will of the UK. And there would also be potential for negotiation of new deals with any third party, so any other non-EU country, without having to rely on Brussels to do so. So the last alternative foreseen by Theresa May is a so-called no Brexit. So the European Court of Justice stated in December that the UK could unilaterally revoke the Article 50. So it means that without the approval of the EU, the UK could decide to stay in the European Union. And so I think there's not much to say about this, but that in principle it should imply a status quo in the relationship, both economically and politically, of the EU and the UK. So I had chosen to sort of put the focus on these three alternatives that were put forward by Theresa May, because they seem the most plausible at the moment. However, I mean, other people seem to foresee other alternatives that could potentially reshuffle the cards significantly. So some do expect renegotiation with the EU, so meaning reopening the negotiation and then going, sitting at a table and discussing for another kind of Brexit. Some foresee a North-style membership, potentially where so the UK would still be in the single market, and maybe as well in the customs union. But this again, I mean, raises the question that first, the European Union would be likely to reopen the negotiation, which doesn't really seem to be the case if you believe the stand of the EU now. And it also implies that there would be some kind of consensus in the UK on this new option, which is again not a given. Well, some also foresee a general election that could then lead to another governance, and hence potentially another proposition for a Brexit. And also, some think that there potentially be a second referendum. So, well, while the first one is sort of clear where it would lead us if, obviously there was a consensus on the option and the EU would be likely to reopen the negotiation, well, it's not really clear what this last bullet point will take us. And well, I think it raises a question of what will be the status of the UK meanwhile, given that there are other important deadlines in the EU that have nothing to do with the UK. So, for example, one can think of the coming EU elections. So I hope that this simple discussion on the different scenarios and what do they imply, and sort of highlighting some of the key features will help you prepare for any of these alternatives and sort of cope with the changes implied by Brexit in the near future. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you for the presentation and the insight. Emma, will you take us through some of the practical things we can do to prepare for a potential no deal?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me your time. I will do my best to take you through some of the practical requirements in the event of a no deal. Required. Under our current assumptions, we do believe that with the right preparation and some of the tools that exist today, 90% of cargo will flow smoothly without any additional delay. Obviously, there will be more involvement with the authorities and ports to make sure that this is still a lot of work to be done, especially this is in the high volume short straits. So our big message here is prepare and engage with all authorities and forums. I will try and take you through a very simple view of how traffic flows from the EU into the UK. It does cover both driver accompanied and unaccompanied, and we are looking at the majority of cargo that doesn't go through border inspection points. So this is the majority of cargo, and not for the anomalies like carnets, transit, and animal products that require inspection. We again are focusing on a worst case scenario, and as traffic moves today, it is unlikely that invoices will be ready at dispatch of goods. But coming into a no deal situation, it will be relevant for those documents to be completed at dispatch so that there are no delays at the port. Documentation will be need to be presented to customs authorities. On export from the EU, there will be required to be an authority to load before the ship. It is also likely that in the event of a no deal, the UK import must also be pre-entered before loading to the vessel. impact on flow and further requirement on an operational level from individual shipping lines. It's also important to note that passport checks for driver accompanied vehicles will be in place, and that ID cards will no longer, or unlikely to be any longer, accepted. So passports will be the requirement. Once the unit is loaded to the vessel, it is a safety and security declaration, or an entry summary declaration as it's technically known, needs to be done. That needs to be done no later than 2 hours prior to arrival in the UK. There will be some divergence from that in some areas, but not yet clarified. The import safety and security declaration is something very different from what we see today, and we'll come back to that in a later stage of the presentation. On arrival in the UK, providing that import declaration has been done, the cargo is likely to be allowed to move directly from the port to the point of destination, where the customs formalities will be finalised. Remembering that for accompanied traffic, passport controls will be in place. Again, we're focusing on preparation and engagement, and we have some tips for preparation. This doesn't cover everything, but I think it's important to pull these points in front of you. There is lots of advice to traders, both from the EU and the UK. There are many documents that have been published, and example links will be shared for you. Please make sure that you keep engaged with these advice details so that you can be prepared going forward. One more important thing is an EORI number. If you haven't yet applied for one, it would be wise to do so. And the local customs website, the information will be there. You should note that if you intend to be an importer in the UK, your European EORI number will not suffice. You will need one for the UK. You don't need to be registered as a UK company, but you may need to apply for a UK VAT, in which case we would advise that you appoint yourself a VAT representative. Again, this is just general advice, and there will be much more involvement going down the line. As I mentioned earlier, submission of entry summary declarations, commonly known as the safety and security declarations, is something that we're not used to seeing, and something that came about after 9/11. We don't use it currently between EU member states or between EEA member states. It's a process with format and something that has got an awful lot of detail behind. We are, of course, engaging to see what concessions can be made. Hope going forward that these will not be required with EU movements. For an import, it is a different declaration than the fiscal declaration. Export, the safety and security declaration is combined with the export entry. On the import, these processes aren't linked due to authority computer systems. But again, we are pushing for that to make sure that we only have to deliver that detail once. It's important to be aware of import duties. On a worst case scenario, we will fall into World Trade Organization tariffs, and we should be looked at as a most favored nation under these rules. We obviously will hope that this is not the case, but it's a very tight negotiation, and there is the possibility that it will be imposed. Customs declaration. Customs declarations for the EU have not been required since 1992, and is very, very different from what we see today. Many of us in the industry have not had to be involved with these, so this is a new requirement. If you deal with EEA states or more deep sea, you would have some engagement with customs formalities, but in the shorter seas through Europe, you would not have seen these apart from in special circumstances. You may wish to undertake customs clearance yourself, or alternatively appoint a customs clearance agent. Just something to note that there are not as many customs agents as used to be when we had to clear everything previously. So it's important to keep an eye on that process. It will require access to a customs IT system, which may be web-based or through a community service provider. You may wish to look at credit facilities with customs, but your agent may be able to do this on your behalf. Another factor that we will not have seen is proof of origin, which will be required to enter a no-deal situation. Again, we need to emphasise that this is all in a no-deal situation, worst case scenario, not what we hope to see at the end of all of this. The FDS, of course, can offer you these service and any assistance you would need. So please feel free to contact any of the Brexit team or your office. Here we have a very, very simple overview for units that don't require border inspection points. It looks simple on paper, but a lot of the detail in the background for these declarations is where the complications arise, as that detail is not with us today. EU requirement leaving the EU, export declaration submitted, the declaration number supplied to the shipping line, and then the permission to load. On a UK requirement, the entry summary declaration or safety and security declaration needs to be submitted within the allotted time frame, and import customs declaration needs to be submitted prior to loading on vessel. Under current assumptions, we are not likely to require a full customs clearance before allowing that off the terminal on arrival into the UK. If we go into a flow from the UK into the EU, there are many similarities, but there are one or two very important points to note. Again, it's all down to preparation. The units will arrive at the port as normal for shipment, and the documents must have been presented to the customs authority, mostly electronically. What is clear is that the shipping line on day one will only need verification that that entry has been submitted and that the goods are clear to leave the UK. Going further down from a no deal, there will be more responsibilities. The other point of note, which is different, is that the temporary storage declaration on arrival into the EU requires further information than we currently supply today. Whilst this is the responsibility of the licence holder, it's important for you to note that there will be additional information requirement. So whilst the terminal of arrival has to submit that information flow needs to come from the customers as well. The documents will need to be sent to the shipping line. Again, import safety and security declarations, fiscal declarations will all need to be done. The difference on arrival into the UK is that full clearance will be needed prior to release from terminal. Again, if we look at the simple overview of what is required, it makes it look very easy, but obviously there is a lot of data submission behind those declarations. We will come on to more detail in that in the next coming slides. Challenges to overcome. Whilst we believe that 90% of that traffic, if the preparation is right, we will move freely, there are still challenges to overcome. And this means more preparation and engagement from everybody's side, from the shipping line to the exporter to the transporter. Will be engaged with local authorities and local forums. Moving on to border inspection points, which we all see as one of the big challenges when it comes down to products from animal origin, which will involve a lot of our food products that we import today, will require border inspection point facilities, which means they will have to have further checks. Animal feed, plant products, and will be subject to additional checks. There will be certificate, and in some cases, they will be required to be presented physically. The BIP points in the UK, we have limited facilities as there are in the UK, and with EU originating goods, it is likely that they will not require intervention on arrival into the UK, as we understand now. Goods originating from third countries that travel through the EU, today they get their full checks on arrival into the EU. However, as we move post-Brexit and a no deal, it is unlikely those checks will be done in the EU. That will mean that they will require border inspection point facilitation on arrival into the UK into an approved port. On the European side, the border inspection points has to be approved at the European level. There are border inspection points in some ports, and other ports need to build these up. There are opportunities to have inland, but this needs to be approved from the EU as well. Currently, most border inspection points are not open 24 hours a day, and there are capacity constraints and waiting time. All these are being discussed and looked into, and DFDS are actively engaging with all the authorities. We have solutions in place to continue the free flow of these products, regardless of a situation at the end of a no deal. Another challenge we see is the temporary storage declaration, which will need to be done before the vessel is allowed to berth into the port of destination in Europe. Whilst there are some requirements in the UK, this is not likely in the first instance. With entry into the EU, this temporary storage declaration must be done and a temporary storage declaration reference number passed back for import clearance. While the documentation shown in front of you shows that some of the details we already have now, there will be some challenges moving forward. For example, commodity codes. Most products don't come across with commodity codes between the EU nations. Luckily, this is only applicable from 2021, and they have conceded that in the meantime, we will not need to put that on just seal numbers. We will also be looking at more movement. These are things that need to be verified in advance. But as you can see, there are additional information than those that we have today. One more challenge, as we've talked about, is the entry summary declaration or safety and security declaration that we currently don't have to submit in the event of between UK and EU and also EEA. This may be not required, as we are consciously discussing with all authorities to be able to have a concession and not submit this information. As you can see from the list of information, it is quite extensive, and the data is not currently shared between parties as it stands today. One have between EU goods. It's important that we are emphasising that this is in the event of a no deal, and we hope that we can move forward with these so these requirements are not in place. So what do we take away from today? One of the big things, as we've said before, is preparation and engagement. We need to be engaged in the right forums, and we need to make sure we're prepared. It's important that you have the right setup and authorizations, as are your numbers, but these are not the only things that can facilitate smooth movement. Things like AEO status, custom simplifications, they could all help the smooth transition. Upscaling our staff members is very important to make sure that they're ready and that we can move these goods without too much interference than we have today. Ensure your housekeeping and your processes are tight, and we can maybe reduce the risk of delays in cargo flow. DFDS are continuously engaging with authorities to reduce any of the impact. As we've said, for example, the BIP availability, the safety and security waivers. And we can also help you in this. We can provide customs documentation service, and with the upcoming changes, we're happy to engage on any forum. As you've noted, we haven't talked about the import and export fiscal requirements, as these are more widely understood within the industry. We also haven't covered things like carnets, transit, and all the anomalies, but we're looking at the basics for the majority of shipments, which is very important. We would like to engage with you further on this, and we would like to keep you up to date as much as possible. We thank you again for your engagement and welcome any further questions.
Thank you, Emma. A lot of information and recommendation. We will make it available in a handout containing the full presentation, but in a more... we'll just take a minute to consolidate some of the questions. We have published some of the questions already, but there's a few others we will try to consolidate and see how we can respond to them. So let's take 30 seconds. Hello again. Hello again.
Hello.
We have published some questions now, and there's a question: if DFDS will offer services within custom brokerage. If not, are you in contact with agents to do so? In this case, and in case of a no-deal Brexit, Rodney.
Yep. To answer that, we already have a customs clearance organisation across the company where we have non-EU routes such as Norway already in place. We have already recruited quite a few new agents and new countries. So the answer to that is yes, we will offer a customs brokerage service. Engagement on that should start fairly quickly, but we would ask you to get in contact with either a member of this team or your local country management within DFDS, but we will be able to offer that service.
Good. Thank you. Reinstalling a Scottish ferry link. Are there any response to that one? I guess it's only if Scotland actually decides to leave the kingdom.
Possibly. I mean, in these situations, we always say nothing is ruled out, and everything's open for discussion. But at this stage, we would not see that a new Scottish ferry link would be in place. Not in the near future, anyway. But it doesn't mean to say that that's ruled out altogether.
Okay. Then there's one of the questions really promoted is what's the chance of a no Brexit? Is it even an option? Is it even an option for UK? Elsa, I don't know if you can contribute a little on that one first.
So I think it depends who you listens to, and a sense that this is a potential option, or at least as I said during my presentation, that the ECJ said that, well, the only thing for it to happen is the UK has to have a consensus on that point, which might be harder, but I guess having a consensus on anything might be a problem currently in the UK. So I think it has to be considered as an option. I'm not sure what probability to attach to that, but
No, and I think it's a political process. You know, we have UK citizens sitting here, and we have EU people sitting here around the table. So I think it is an option, but it's just a political process. So therefore, it can go either way, depending on how people see it. There's a question on commodity codes, which I know nothing about. Will they be the same, or will new codes be issued?
is that a question for me?
No, I think I'll hand it over to Lotte.
You can say to start with, I think the commodity code, which is the custom codes you actually use to designate the which type of goods you're importing or exporting, will be the same to start with. They are based on WTO rules and will probably be the same.
Okay, good. Then there's a question about are fish and seafood included in the products requiring BIP?
Yes, the answer to that is fish will require the border inspection point, and that is a very significant issue. We're very actively involved both with the Scottish seafood industry and the French authorities to make sure there is a solution developed for that. So it's a very active, ongoing discussion to create or make sure we have a solution that works in the event of a hard Brexit.
Okay, thanks. Then there's another question. Can you make it clear? There will be one safety and security declaration for each individual commodity item?
We expect that each commodity item there would be one declaration
per
commodity, but it might be on an item level. It's not fully clarified yet, and we're hoping very much that we can limit the amount of information that is needed. But again, this is one area that has not had as much focus as it should have done. Under current rules, it's one item, one line per commodity, but we would hope that in the coming weeks, months, we can get more clarity on the actual requirements.
Are we engaged in those discussions?
We are heavily engaged with all those discussions.
Okay.
It's important because there are two differences. For accompanied traffic and unaccompanied traffic, there are different responsibilities along the supply chain. So it's important that everybody is involved in those discussions.
Okay, thanks, Emma. I think there's one here for you, Elsa.
Yes.
Can UK extend Article 50 notice period?
So, well, in principle, if the UK wants to extend Article 50, they would have to have the agreement of the EU, which is not the case if they just want to revoke the Article 50.
Okay, so if
I think it is then the case of whether the EU agrees or not.
Yeah. Then there's a question on, can we trade under no duty for all on the cargo? Is that looked into?
I'm sorry, I had a technical problem. I couldn't understand
Okay.
what you said.
The question, if we expect duties to apply for the goods trading between UK and EU, or will it be duty free, or will there be duties linked to this?
So it depends which scenario you think is gonna apply, right? I think I stressed that if they do have a deal, so if the current deal is passed and the EU and the UK have a free trade agreement, in principle, there's no duty between the UK and the EU on every goods. But if there's any other scenario that is sort of a harder Brexit, then you might expect some duties.
Yeah. Lotte?
Yes,
Yeah.
I will agree on that.
Then there's a question, how many digit is the commodity code? 8 or 10? I think that's a hardcore question.
So I'll just jump in. I think it depends which declaration you're doing and where you're giving it. For the temporary storage declaration, I believe it's a reduced set. But I think
yes,
Lotte's
I agree
more...
with it. It will be depending on...
So for the same commodity, you can have 2 different codes?
It's the same code, but you have some extra digits.
Okay.
Some
additional information in that
additional
digits.
information, yes.
Okay. Interesting. Then there's a question on the 90%. You know, we were and so on. We expect that up to 90% could go through. What would not go through? Rodney?
I think we're confident that it is possible to achieve the 90%, but it doesn't come without a lot of hard work and commitment. And I think the key areas, one, as Emma has already said, in terms of preparation is really important. Communication, awareness, and preparation are really key here. Important to remember, for anything coming in and out of the UK, there's an exporter and an importer. So there's 2 people involved. So we need both sides to make sure they have their documentation prepared correctly. So engaging now in preparation is really vital. We are aware that things will not run smoothly, but with a bit of hard work, we can make it a lot easier. We're certainly aware that any delays can cause disruption, and we're working hard to provide the capacity. So in terms of shipping capacity and I suppose equipment capacity, such as trailers, we're working hard to provide the capacity to avoid lengthy delays or disruptions. Another important thing is the tools that are under development. We believe that most of the tools are available within the ports to facilitate what we need. Conscious that obviously it's in the news a lot, the channel ports with their very high volume are still a discussion point, and there's a lot of work going on with those systems to get them ready in the event of a hard Brexit. So that's a challenge. Obviously, there's alternatives, and we're looking at additional capacity to help out on that. Then finally, I suppose the 4th point, we've mentioned the seafood and the movement of food. Sanitary inspections are a major thing. The BIPs in France, certainly, and in most places in Europe and in the UK, are small in number and work generally a 9 to 5 operation. So there's a lot of engagement going on to make sure there's more qualified staff available. We're certainly collaborating a lot with the authorities in France to see what we can do. But we need a lot more border inspection facilities, and there's a lot of work being done to make sure that's delivered on time.
Okay, good. There's one additional question we have time for. It's about the contract that was published on the Department of Transport. I have a statement on this one, because this is It's a little bit limited in information we can provide due to the fact that there's confidentiality in the contract. However, we are allowed to share that we will provide extra sailings between Immingham and Cuxhaven, Immingham Rotterdam, and Felixstowe Rotterdam on behalf of the UK Department of Transportation, and the rest is up for them to publish. All other questions we will dig into and find a decent answer. We don't have much more time today. We will compile a Q&A. We will publish it. We will record the webinar, and as stated earlier, we will also evaluate how to communicate on this important topic going forward. Thank you for everybody joining today. Do not hesitate to reach out to your local DFDS representative or someone from the DFDS Brexit team if there's something we can help with. And by this, we will wish you a great evening from all of us at DFDS.